All right.
Recording in progress.
Greetings and welcome to this second listening session for the State Water Resources Control Board Agricultural Expert. My name is Bill. I'm Assistant Water. Before we get started, I'm going to run through a couple of quick housekeeping items, and then I will Kiara for opening remarks from the board. If you require Spanish language interpretation for today's session, I would ask that you navigate to the language channels by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. I would ask if everybody could select English or Spanish. That would be wonderful, just to cut down on any background noise. And if you're listening in Spanish, please click on mute original audio. For any technical assistance, please email dwq-ilrp@waterboards.ca.gov. With that, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Michael Soler, who will run through these instructions in Spanish. Michael.
Muy buenas tardes a todos los personas que están atendiendo. Por favor, noten, se ofrecen servicios de interpretación para la sesión de hoy. Para escuchar el programa en español, seleccione el icono del globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla que dice Interpretación. Luego, seleccione su idioma Spanish, español, y de ahí podrá escuchar todo el programa en español. Muchas gracias. Si necesita asistencia, puede escribir a DWQ.
Michael, we're going to make one small update to our interpretation channel very quickly, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
All right. Back to you, Sam.
Thanks so much, Michael. All right. Let's go ahead and jump into it. Hopefully everybody can see my screen okay. Very briefly, I want to run through our agenda for today. Before I do, I want to recognize that at least one of our panel members, Chair Dr. Daniel Geisler from UC Davis, is on the line. We appreciate your participation, Chair Geisler. A quick note that the overall purpose of this meeting is really to hear directly from the public. I know many, if not most of you, have attended at least one of the working group sessions for this meeting. This is an opportunity for you to share your thoughts on the expert panel process. For panel members that are not present today, a recording will be provided to them in advance of their next session. Very quickly today, in just a moment, as I mentioned, we'll turn it over to Annalisa Chiara. Annalisa's with the Division of Water Quality to review the panel purpose and process, as well as the timeline and public input opportunities. A team from the State Water Board will also very quickly update all of you on the development of new tools regarding nitrate reporting and management in the Central Valley. So we look forward to hearing from them. But the bulk of the time today is set aside for public comment. And it's really broken into two sections. From about 1:30 to about 3 p.m. For those that have taken a look at the public notice for this meeting, you'll have there were individuals who reached out to us for an extended public comment period. I have all of those slides queued up. And for your comments, if you are presenting that, if you could just request next slide when you'd like me to advance, that would be wonderful. We'll take a bit of a break. I know sitting through a 4-hour-long session, going through some of this material is a little bit too long, so we want to make sure that we build in about a 15-minute break or so. We're going to play that by ear, depending on how quickly the presentations go and the volume of public comments we receive. For the second session, around 3:15, we will convene for that. We did receive requests from 13 individuals to provide a 3-minute public comment during that 3:15 p.m. item. I'll run through the instructions on how to join the queue if you didn't submit a public comment request in advance, once we get to that item. Around 4:50, we will reconvene for closing comments, and our hope is to adjourn around 5. I will note, if we run through the comment queue in advance or before that 4:50 closing time, we can adjourn this meeting early. We want to make sure, knowing that we're ramping up for the holiday season, we don't have to keep you here all the way until 5 if everyone who wishes to comment does that before that 4:50 cutoff time. All right, so with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Annalisa Chiara. Annalisa is the Assistant Deputy Director for the Division of Water Quality at the State Water Resources Control Board. And with that, Annalisa, take it away.
Thanks so much, Sam. On behalf of our State Water Board team, I just wanted to continue to share our appreciation for the time and effort of this expert panel. The work and the panel's recommendations are critical to the success of a sustainable and protective irrigated lands regulatory program. So as you all are aware, a lot of people are paying attention to this process, and we will hear from many interested parties at today's listening session, which we really appreciate your time and your interest in the work that we're doing. So I also want to acknowledge how this public participation process and the involvement of this group of committed interested parties is also contributing to the overall success of this expert panel process. So thank you to everyone for your continued participation and dedication supporting this effort. And we do look forward to the presentations and comments that are planned for today's listening session. Next slide, Sam. So before we dive into comments, I'd like to just briefly provide an overview of the panel purpose and process, timeline, and public input opportunities. So there might be one more slide right before, Sam. Okay, no, I don't think there is. Okay, so I can just verbally say this. As highlighted in the panel charter, the panel's purpose is to discuss the appropriateness and applicability of nitrogen limits and targets for irrigated agriculture, review the 2014 expert panel recommendations with a focus on identified data gaps and availability of new and updated science to address those gaps, and then also to develop independent recommendations to answer the specific questions that we posed for the second statewide agricultural panel, utilizing the best available science. So we feel very fortunate to have an amazing group of expert panel members that represent a balanced combination of scientific experts drawn from entities such as academic institutions and scientific and policy institutes. So the members also come with lenses from various parts of the state, including the Central Valley, Central Coast, as well as Southern California. So our panel member names and titles are on this slide. And I do want to point out, as Sam did, our chair, Dr. Daniel Geisler from UC Davis Cooperative Extension, who we work with closely to plan for each meeting. So if you have had the opportunity to listen into the panel working group meetings, you know how thoughtful and committed this group is to helping answer the charged questions. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Annalisa. And I would just note that panel member Ruth Dahlquist Willard is also on the line today. Thank you, Ruth, for joining.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ruth. Okay, so we do have multiple touch points for the panel and opportunities for interested parties to provide input. There are 3 main categories of meetings, and all are open to the public and have the option for virtual participation. So the first category on the far left are our plenary meetings. So these meetings are similar to our state and regional board meetings in formality. The next category in the middle are our public listening sessions, like the one we're in today. So these meetings are more informal and designed for state board and panel members to listen and get feedback. We do say that a quorum of the panel is not necessary, but many do attend or listen to the recording after. And then the final category on the right are our panel working group meetings. And so this is where the actual crafting of responses by panel members take place. They're really great to listen into some great discussions, conversations, information shared. And we do have 4 of them coming up in January of 2026. And then that small box on the bottom, well, not small, but the smaller box on the bottom is one that we had added recently. So it is one public workshop that we're including for when the draft report of recommendations is released for public comment. And then what we wanted to do was provide an opportunity for the public and interested party members to offer comments or ask questions as they're reviewing the draft report. And so we've had a lot of these touch points since August, as you can see listed here, at least 12 of them. So it's been a fast-paced process with a lot of involvement from interested parties. Next slide. Okay, so to dive into a little more detail, the process for sharing and finalizing the draft panel report is provided here with estimated timeframes for each of the steps. So around February of 2026, we anticipate a draft panel report of recommendations to be released for 30-day public comment period. And then, as I had mentioned before, we have a public workshop that we plan to hold within that 30-day public comment period to support any of those initial questions and hear any comments as people review the draft recommendations and craft any of their responses that they'll be submitting. So all public comments, both verbal and written, that we receive will be summarized and provided for panel consideration. Just wanted to note that a formal response to comments will not be developed, but all comments will be provided to our panel members, and they will review and decide if any of them will result in updates to the draft panel report. And then the final bullet, the final panel report will be presented at a 3rd plenary meeting. We're anticipating that that'll take place around March or April of 2026. Next slide. Okay, so we also want to highlight that there are many other opportunities to stay engaged in this process. We have an ILRP expert panel website, which we update frequently. This includes all posted notices, agendas, and documents, as well as resources. And then we also have any of our past meeting recordings, just in case you may have missed any of the plenary meetings, the working group meetings, or listening sessions. Next slide. Okay, so drawing your attention to the documents and resources, we also have an FTP site that we created where all the documents and resources that are shared with the panel members are saved and are accessible to the public. And then we also wanted to highlight 2 new additional tools that we've recently developed and we're excited about, and we will be providing quick tutorials for each as well today. So our water board staff created, well, the first is an INMP data visualization. So irrigation and nutrient management plan data visualization tool, which is intended to provide informational support for the panel as well as interested parties where we have consistent statewide nitrogen data. So it was not developed to be indicative of water quality conditions, but the data set primarily consists of reported data from approved third-party groups, but also may contain some state board staff calculations as well. And in that case, it's specifically when we've integrated Region 3 specific data, which is typically reported at the ranch level. So our team will also be releasing additional documentation and video tutorials to supplement this tool in the near future, so please stay tuned. And then the second tool is a flyover map created by state board staff as a response to a request from the panel for a map showing where there are irrigated lands and impacted drinking water wells. So we created a 2025 ILRP and nitrate risk map using publicly available data from INMP summary reports. DWR agricultural land use, and then as well as water quality data and aquifer risk map areas from our groundwater ambient monitoring and assessment, or GAMMA, information system. So our team created this web map to support the second Ag Expert Panel in evaluating the potential for spatial relationships between agricultural land use and where there is potential groundwater contamination from nitrate. So we do include a disclaimer that this map is not intended to predict or estimate the drinking water quality at any given location or attribute nitrogen to a specific agricultural source. So it's really publicly available data that we've visualized. So now I'll pass the microphone to staff that helped develop these tools. The first will be Margaret Champagny, who will provide a demo of the INMP data visualization tool, followed by Lale Rastagarzadeh, who will provide a demo of the 2025 ILRP nitrate risk map. So with that, I'll pass it to you, Margaret.
Okay, hello. My name is Margaret Champagny, and I am a state water boards worker. And let me share my screen here. Make sure. Okay. Okay. So this is the INMP summary report data visualization tool, which is built on Power BI. For those unfamiliar, Power BI is a Microsoft platform that allows data to be brought in from multiple sources and then visualized through several different formats, graphs, charts, and it allows a really user-friendly way to incorporate data into those visualizations. So the intent of this tool is really to provide a standardized and compiled version of the INMP data that has been submitted by the third-party groups. It allows filtering across the different reporting categories. You can filter it for regions, for coalitions, for crops even, and also it displays it in a variety of different kind of visualizations. There are a couple limitations when it comes to this tool in its current form. We only have currently submitted data from regions 3, 5, 7, and 8 included in the tool right now. However, Region 3 does have their own INMP data tool, which is also available, which dives into the data in a different format. So the tool opens up on this main screen, which immediately pops up a disclaimer, which all the users will have to click continue, which acknowledges that they will consent to use the tool as intended. The intent of this tool is to provide information and analytical support for the panel. And just to emphasize, the nitrogen totals presented are not indicative of water quality conditions. So when you click continue, it will indicate that you're consenting to use the tool as intended. So once you select continue, it brings you to this data navigation page. So you can click through any of these buttons and it'll bring you to the different pages of the report. So we'll click on this first one right here. So this initial page displays information on current INMP enrolled members. On the left, it shows kind of the relative percentages of how many members are in each third party. And then on the map on the right, it displays which regions in the state that we have data submitted from the INMP report data. The map on the right is built via township ranges. So each township range that we have data from is displayed on that map. And the nice thing about the way these visualizations work together is you can click on one of the visualizations on the side and it automatically filters the map on the right. So that's one way users can filter the data is by directly clicking on the visualizations. In addition to that, there's also filters in this filter menu where you can continue to filter by, for example, cover crops, as well as look at just specific third-party groups. And then that's one other way you can filter the visualizations. So that is the data that's presented on this page. We also have pages that display data on each of the reporting categories. So this reporting category is the anonymous member ID. For all three of the reporting categories, we have similar data presented. So we have a graph showing median of A over R for member ID in this one. This data visualization also is filterable. And then we also have what's called a matrix table underneath it, which shows a table of the data. And these two visualizations are connected. So for example, if you would like to click on directly on the visualization, it automatically filters the table as well. And similar to the other page, there is a filtering menu that users can click on directly and have a couple more filtering options that can be used. For example, if you would like to only see a specific year, you can filter down to that. And then if you would only like to see a specific crop within that year, you can do that as well. Also on these tables, we have the information displayed in A-R. And this visualization works the same way. You can also click directly on the bars within this visualization to filter the data below. And the only real difference with A-R as far as the chart goes is due to the nature of A-R, there can be negatives, as you can see. And so you can use these buttons below to switch back and forth between whether you'd like to display A over R or A-R. So as I said, there's three similar pages for the three reporting categories. So this is the page for township and range reporting category. This one is a little bit different because the current requirements require growers to submit data in pounds rather than pounds per acre, as the other reporting categories do. So just a note for that when looking at this data. But the setup of these pages is very similar. There's a visualization that links to a matrix table below. This one is displaying A over R. And then we also have A-R. But just again to indicate A-R in this format is only in pounds, not pounds per acre. But in addition to the first page, you can also click through a filtering menu on the left-hand side that can filter all of the visualizations on the page. So just to show a quick example. So now you're seeing only Region 7 data, both in this chart and then in this table below. And then this is the third reporting category page. This one is by anonymous APN ID. And this is a little bit different than the regular assessor's parcel number, as is it's not the same APN that is listed by the county assessor's office. It's an anonymized version of that APN. So just for your reference when you're utilizing the tool. But this page also has the same kind of information where there is a chart for A over R and A-R with an associated matrix table that is filterable directly by clicking or by using the filter menu on the left-hand side. So those are the three pages that show the different reporting categories. We also have this page that shows the outliers in 3-year reporting. We currently only have outliers calculated and submitted to us from a couple of the coalitions within Region 5 and then Region 3 data. So this is a little limited, but this is the data we have right now, and it is displayed. You can display it by crop and then percentage by the coalitions. And then we also have it by year in coalitions. So these visualizations also work similarly to the last couple pages where you can click directly on the specific bar you're interested in and it will show you the data within these tables. Also within these tables, I should mention that you can click and open up the data further also if you really would like to dig deep down into the data and see specific information. So you can see, for example, it allows you to open up a much deeper subset of the information if required. And then just like the other pages, we also have a filterable menu on the left-hand side. That allows users to filter directly based on whatever category they are interested in. So for example, we can look at grains within this data. There it goes. And then, like I said, we have the two different versions of it, so you can users can click back and forth between those. Okay, so the final page of this tool, it's taking a little while to load, but once the tables load, there they go. This is a table that, or this is a page that presents the 3 reporting categories in tabular form. So you can see they're labeled member ID, township range, and APN ID. As there is some instructions up here, if you would like to look at the tables at a little bit more of a deeper level, you can click on this upper right hand button right here that says focus mode. And when you select that, it opens up the data in a bigger format that allows users to look at the data a little bit more deeply. This page also has filtering options, so you can filter the tables you're looking at before you open up that in focus mode. So it works the same way as the other pages. So that is the same for all 3 tables. You can click focus mode for all 3 of them and look at the data individually like that. Now this tool has been open to the public for a couple days now, and we already have had some great feedback that has helped us refine the tool, both from the public and from panel members. So we look forward to hearing more feedback as the public is able to dive deeper into this tool. So you can click that home button and it brings you back to the data navigation center. And then that is it for now. We hope to update and refine this tool, but this is our current version. And that is the tool as it is right now. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Lale now to show her.
Good afternoon. My name is Lale SWRCB, and I will share with you our nitrate map. But before I do that, I want to just emphasize again that this map was created in response to the panel request for a better understanding of the spatial relationship between the agriculture land use and areas with the potential groundwater contamination from nitrate. And what I'm presenting is not intended to predict or estimate the drinking water quality at any location or assign nitrogen source to the agriculture. And now let me share my screen. Okay. It may take you a while, a couple seconds. You see the screen, but once you use the link for the ILRP and nitrate risk map, it takes you to this landing page. Here you see a description of our map, and also you will see all the service layers that we used it to create this map. And all these layers also are individually accessible if anyone wants to work with them individually as well. You have, if you want to get access to them, you can also import this map into the ArcGIS for further analysis or review. But what's publicly is available is for actually looking at the actual map and interact with the layers. For getting there, you can either click on the thumbnail or open Map Viewer, and it takes you to this page, which is very similar to GIS, all the functionality, but limited. Then here you see that the main layers, I go over the main layers that we have used and start just turning up all of them and explain them individually. Okay, I missed this one. Okay, start with the regional board boundaries, and then we move to the 2025 nitrate contamination risk area. I tend to have the legend. Okay, the 2025 nitrate contamination risk area basically is this layers identifies areas at the section level with high, medium, or low nitrate risk based on groundwater data. The risk is assessed using the exceedance of maximum contamination levels for MCL in publicly available groundwater quality data collected from all kinds of wells that they have available data, such as monitoring domestic municipal irrigation. And they look at this data at the depth similar to domestic and drinking water. Again, I want to emphasize that this map reflects potential groundwater contamination risk for the domestic and state small drinking water system wells users. The area identified as at risk do not guarantee that there are drinking water users in these areas, nor they confirm that any existing water supply is impacted. The second layer is the nitrate risk in the 2025 Aquifer Risk Map water quality well data. This layer also is derived from the 2025 Aquifer Risk Map, as mentioned in the previous layer. This layer shows the locations of the wells that provided the data, nitrate data, for creating the aquifer risk area map for the nitrate. We also looked at the contamination in this area, and we assessed the nitrate risk level in these wells as high, medium, or low based on their nitrate concentration level. The next map is the gamma drinking water wells with nitrogen exceedances. This data is derived from the gamma groundwater information system, and we identified municipal and other drinking water wells with nitrate, nitrite, or combined exceedances over the past 10 years. This layer includes wells that may not be captured in the 2025 Aquifer Risk Map because they may have different screening depth compared to identified depth of the domestic drinking water wells that was used in the Aquifer Risk Map. The next layer is actually the first, let me just turn off this. Okay, this is actually the very first layer that Margaret showed you. That's the areas of enrollment that Margaret showed you. And this is the township range that we derived from all the available submitted irrigation and nitrogen management plans. These are the latest information that we have and included in this map. Again, I should emphasize that this is not a comprehensive information and data of all the agriculture area. There might be agriculture growers that they have not enrolled in the program. And also, this is a good segue into the next layer, that this doesn't show all the ag area in the state of California. For that, we're including another layer here, that this is provided by the Department of Water Resources. This is a crop, it's a land use data that includes the crop types and acreage. They developed this by Land IQ under the contract with the Water Resources, Department of Water Resources. And this layer supports the groundwater sustainability planning and environmental assessments. The data goes through a rigorous Q&A, and they publish every 2 years, I believe, this data. And this is the latest that's available, and we use this data also along to the other layers, including our irrigated land regulatory program, growers who that enrolled in the program. This is these tools are very new to us and fresh from the oven, and we still are, for ourselves also, we're looking at if there are any bugs or there is any issue that we need to modify, or also if we can improve it. With that, I think that this concludes my presentation, and I take it back to Sam. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Margaret and Lale, for that great presentation. It's an exciting tool and really great to see this moving along. It's going to clearly be a huge benefit to the agricultural expert panel moving forward. At this point, we want to go ahead and continue with our presentation, and we'll get these slides queued up. Hopefully everybody can see this okay. Just a quick note, as I mentioned, public comment is divided into 2 sections. The first is for extended public comment. If you refer back to the meeting notice for this meeting, we did request that anybody who wanted a longer presentation contact the State Water Board at least 10 days in advance. The deadline for extended public comment was December 5th. So the first section will run through the presentations that we received. I won't read through all of them on the right, but you can see we have a great series of talks for you in just a moment. We'll take a break after this section and the presentations, and then move into general public comment, and I'll repeat the instructions for that section once we get there. With that, though, our first presentation for the day is from Aaron Dillon. Aaron is from the Plant California Alliance. And Aaron, hopefully you can unmute on your end, and I will run through your slides.
All right, can you hear me? It doesn't look like I can start my video.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. And let me just quickly make you a co-host, and you will be able to start your video as well.
Perfect. All right, thank you so much. So again, my name is Aaron Dillon with the Plant California Alliance. We're the nursery trade association in California, and wanted to talk a little bit just about the kind of uniqueness of nursery production and how it's related to particularly trying to report removed and the challenges we have with that. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I think this is a very important slide to kind of quantify the potential impact from nurseries when we're thinking about the impact nurseries can have on groundwater. So in the 2022 Census of Agriculture, it identified approximately 240 million acres of farmland in California. And nursery production, there's about 41,000 acres of outdoor production, 4,300 acres of greenhouse production, so for a total of about 45,000 acres. So that comes to around 0.19% of the total farmland in California is nursery. So we're not a huge player land-wise when you look at it overall. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So most nurseries are small family-owned businesses. So this data is a bit old here from 1997, a report by somebody named Hoyt Carmen that did a lot of economic research on the nursery industry. So I put that little chart down there in the bottom right to kind of give you an idea that these numbers, even though they're from 1997, are still fairly accurate in terms of the size of the farms. But in general, many of them are small scale and do not generate a ton of income. And this other statistic is from this 2020 report that talks about how a majority of the nursery incorporated businesses are family owned. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a kind of a repeat. Bruno Piton gave this presentation to the group last Friday. He's done some research on trying to identify in containerized nursery crops, when we put nitrogen on these plants, what happens to the nitrogen? Where does it go? So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, this is just a little bit of a, a little bit of an idea of what we're looking at, right? Some of this is going to be used by the plant, some of it gets off gas, and a little bit is going to be lost out of the bottom of the container. So the question is how much? So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So what Bruno found was that about 61% of the nitrogen that we put on to containerized plants is going to stay with the plant, in the container, in the pot. There's some percentage that will run off. There's a good percentage that is gassed off. And then there's a very small percentage, less than 3%, that is potentially leached into soil beds underneath where we're doing the nursery production. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So in summary, the way we're currently having to report, we have to talk about all the nitrogen that we put on. And those worksheets are going to tend to make nurseries, it's going to overestimate the potential impact of the nitrogen that we're putting onto these containerized plants. Bruno's kind of identifying this as potentially, 39% that's potentially leachable. And only 3% of that actually is getting leached down into the surface, ground surface. So the other problem that we have is that in the nursery industry, we grow an incredible diversity of plants. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And it's a problem because we do not have all the calculations we need to try to figure out the coefficients. So this is a slide I borrowed from Preservation Inc. They did a webinar on Monday where they're talking about getting us ready to try to produce INMPs. So these first 4 sections, this is information that we have and we can pretty easily report. Nitrogen concentration in irrigation water, we're doing our water test, so we know what that is. Soil N concentration, we can get a reading of what the nitrogen is in our potted soil media when we start. We could do another reading when we send that product out, the plant out. We know how much irrigation water we're putting on. Most of them have meters, flow meters that we can use to measure that. And then we know how much fertilizer we apply. We all have bills that relate to our fertilizer purchases. So all of that information is something that the nursery industry can pretty easily report. Where we run into problems is here in this line 5, the quantity of the crop harvested, pounds of nitrogen removed at harvest. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So the issue is that we don't have nitrogen removal coefficients for the majority of the crops that we grow. Again, single growers can have hundreds or even thousands of crops in production at any one time. We have very different time frames for nursery production. Some crops, annuals, bedding plants might finish in a couple of weeks, maybe a month. Long-term tree crops might take years. So when we're trying to do this reporting of applied per year and remove per year, it gets really messy. And again, different container sizes. here at our nursery, we produce stuff in a 4-inch size pot up to a 20-gallon container. You know, the 4-inch size tree is going to be 16 inches tall. The 20-gallon container is going to be 8 feet tall. So the more variables you have to try to keep track of and try to report, is going to create this really difficult, complex data set. And the problem is that we're being told that we have to report even though we don't have accurate information. So we're really concerned that what we're going to end up with is a swag. So a WAG is a wild ass guess. And a swag is a scientific wild ass guess. We're going to try to make some estimates. And I worry when you see like the maps that we saw, when people are looking at this data as if it is reported as being accurate, it's not. And so it's going to create a very unclear picture as to what's actually happening. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So in the 2018 ESJ order, it allows for exemptions for reporting R. So this is directly, I think, reference to the question 9 for the panel. And it acknowledges that there are going to be instances where segments of agriculture are going to have a hard time measuring yield. And that there may be other ways to do it, or that we are just going to have to report A. So again, this is something that I think from the nursery industry perspective, we don't have a big challenge reporting A. It's what that A means is going to be harder to sort of quantify. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So what nursery would really prefer to try to see happen is that we try to develop potentially a separate waste discharge requirement for nursery, or not an exemption from total reporting, but we need to try to make sure that we're not reporting data that's going to be inaccurate. It's going to take a ton of work and a ton of money to try to figure out all of these crop coefficients for all the different crops that are produced inside of the nursery industry. And again, when you look at the size of the nursery industry, the amount of land that's in nursery production relative to the total farmland in California, you really have to wonder, is all of this cost and time and effort that would go into trying to get this calculation really worth it in the end? Is the impact from nursery truly that great? There is precedent for separate industry-specific programs. Dairy and rice both have their own kind of programs because of the uniqueness of their production. So we envision this would involve something like farm evaluations, nitrogen management plans based on verifiable best management practices that would be required of a nursery grower to participate in some kind of an alternative program. And potentially there would be a third party that would then audit this information. So there's a final slide. So again, what we're requesting is the development of some kind of alternative pathway. Bruno referenced this in his talk. There is a lot of literature and data out there about best management practices for nurseries. We do identify some of this stuff in our current farm plans. And I like the idea of those farm plans being living documents that we're going to try to get better as we go. I think reading through the ESJ document back from 2018, it talks about how so much of what agriculture has been taught, is about trying to generate these large yields and like maximize production. And that there's going to have to be this like kind of new approach. And we're going to have to think about how we farm differently. And the goal, I think I always like the idea of like Kaizen, right? That you're going to have this constant sort of continuous improvement and continuing to get better. And I worry about the way the system is currently set up now because it seems very punitive. I think we've heard some talks where they've referenced the idea of having more carrot and less stick. So I hope we can try to get to something like that. So again, that's all I have. And I want to thank you guys for putting this on and really thank the panel for all the time they're putting into this. It's an incredible endeavor and we're grateful for their work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Aaron. Much appreciated. Next, we are joined by, I believe it's Thomas Gelzerts and Chris Height. Chris and Thomas, let me unmute you. And Chris, you're welcome to turn on your video. I will do the same for, and is your colleague is Thomas, is that right, Chris?
No, it's not. This is actually Danny Liu.
Terribly sorry, you're joining in the same room. Thanks so much.
No problem. How's it going? All right, we'll get started. We're here to discuss nitrogen in the irrigation water, as well as organic nitrogen efficiency and uptake. If you want to switch to the next slide. So here you have the uptake curve. In the blue, it is a summer broccoli plant, and in the red, you have the nitrogen uptake curve for the winter broccoli plant. So you have a much steeper uptake curve in the summertime compared to the wintertime. And in organic fertility, you tend to have to over-apply up front to get an application and an uptake at that time. You move to the next one. So Daniel Geisler and Patricia Lizicki did a study on a whole lot of different organic amendments and their composition. So we tend to stick around the PF 6% and the GF 4% as far as our organic pelleted materials that we put out. And so when you do place those pellets out, you right at the moment, you have to count every pound of nitrogen that you put out. But as far as a mineralization standpoint, after 80 days, you only get about 45 to 50% of the mineralization that you would expect. And if you move to the next slide, we did our own studies here for my PhD work, and we did a study in 3 different soil textures with an 851 fertilizer and a 662 fertilizer, both pelleted. And at the end of 12 weeks, we saw that only about 30 to 40% of the added nitrogen mineralized over that period of time, which 12 weeks is a realistic growing period for most broccoli crops. So in order to get you have to put almost 3 times as much nitrogen to get out what you would expect for an entire broccoli crop. If you move to the next slide. So we also incubated in 3 different soil textures, 2 liquid products, a 422 and a 700. So the 700 came out and had almost an 80% mineralization rate, whereas the 422, it topped out at about 55%. So you get more efficiency out of your liquid products than your pelleted products, but they are more costly. If you can move to the next one. So putting together a timeline of how much we would apply and how much to expect out of your pellets and your liquid products, we estimated on the high end, we did about a 45 to 50% expectation on the pelleted material, and we did about a 65 to 70% on our liquid materials that we had put out. And totaling, we got an applied nitrogen amount of 368 pounds of nitrogen. The expectation of what would be mineralized was only 219. And that is enough to make a broccoli crop, but only barely if you have a very high yield. And then we estimated the nitrogen from the soil organic matter as well from Miller et al., another one of Daniel Geisler's papers. And you would have received another 30 pounds of nitrogen. So there's a little bit of wiggle room as to how much we could have applied, but still the amount of applied versus how much mineralizes in an organic production is not what would be expected. And so if you can move to the next slide again. So the top line is how much we would have applied. And the bottom line is how much we would expect to actually get out of that material. It's not accounting for the amount of days after the application for the mineralization to occur, which would be on the next slide. But this gives you an idea of how much you would put down and how much nitrogen you actually expect over that 12-week period to mineralize. You move to the next slide. Here it gets a little convoluted. So the first line on the very top is how much nitrogen we applied. The blue line is the amount that we expect to get out of that material. The darker black line would be when we expect that amount of nitrogen to come out of the material and mineralize and be available to the plant. And then the bottom yellow line is the amount of nitrogen the broccoli uptakes. So you can see it starts out at the beginning, and up till about day 20, you're not having a whole lot of mineralization. But in order to get the amount of nitrogen at that point, you have to apply early on. And so there is that potential where you could leach the nitrogen out when you're doing a pre-irrigation, or at planting, you tend to do a heavier water to try and get the roots to establish. So there's a chance of losing nitrogen there. But if you don't put the pellets into the bed at that time, you're not going to be able to mineralize that amount of nitrogen that plant uptakes at that 20-day period of time. So you have a steep uptake curve and not a whole lot of mineralization occurring at that point. If you can move to the next one. So moving from an organic perspective into Danny Lou and myself about 5 years ago did a nitrogen trial with irrigation water, and we used high nitrogen wells to irrigate crops, and we shut off the applied fertilizer on one of the beds in sand, a silt, and a clay soil. And we just wanted to try and see if we can use the irrigation water efficiently to fertilize the crops. And from what you'll see, it was not. It did not go well. If you move to the next slide. So this was our first trial. We did have a line break on one of the trials, but besides that, this was our silty soil, and it was on one of our ranches. Let's see. Do you know about how many ppm was?
Yeah.
Well, this one.
Yes, this is the one.
Oh, okay. It was 51 ppm of nitrate in that well. So we were expecting to be able to utilize that nitrogen, and so we completely cut off the fertilizer from that line. And then each time we fertilized, we made sure it didn't get any applications. If you can move to the next slide. So this was the result at the end of that trial. So one back up, please. So this was the result at the end of this trial. So on the left-hand side, you can see that was a full fertilizer program, irrigation, nitrogen, and fertilizer that was in that went into each of the other beds. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that was the irrigation and only. And it was about a 30% yield that we got compared to the grower standard that actually came out of that. So it wasn't usable. We didn't harvest that line. The only reason we know it was that much was because her and I went in and harvested that amount to see what the comparison was. If you can move to the next one. This was the clay soil that we used. So you can see that there wasn't that much of a difference between the different plants. Where the yellow flag is right there was the bed that we used. And there wasn't a difference until we got into the rows, which if you can go to the next slide. So this was at harvest. So on the left-hand side was the standard program where it received fertilizer and it received irrigation water. And it took 127 feet to get good quality broccoli into that box and fill the box. Whereas on the right-hand side was our irrigation only. And what we harvested, it took 3 times as many feet to get that full box. But also you can see the elongation in the broccoli, and that we used it for our box to fill up, but As far as everybody else, they probably wouldn't have taken this to market. It was not marketable at that point. So from a field perspective, the field looked good, but from a market perspective, that wasn't really harvestable yield.
And that well was at 48 ppm, NO3N.
And we applied 219 pounds, which should have been enough to, in just the irrigation. So that should have been enough to grow a fully functioning broccoli plant. We can go to the next one. This one's the most shocking. So if you can't guess, the middle line right there was the trial block where we turned off the nitrogen. And this was actually the highest nitrate in the well. It was 60.6 ppm. And so it looked okay at the start, and then over the weekend, everything else grew except for this one block, this one line. We move to the next one. It was very, very prominent, and I actually got several calls from people asking what we had done to that one line and why it was like that, and can we fix it? And we told them, no, just leave it that way. It's on purpose. So there was textural differences for sure between the utilization of the irrigation nitrogen. If you can go to the next one. So this was about a week before harvest. So even in the fully fertilized, the heads weren't huge, but on the right-hand side where we had just irrigation water, a week before harvest, we had just button-sized broccoli. And so there was no marketable yield out of that one. We go to the next slide. So here was the result of that trial in the sand. On the left-hand side, we have the grower standard. So there was marketable yield that came out of that when we did fertilize it. But on the right-hand side, those 3 florets there were what had accumulated on the top of those broccoli stems. So maybe we could have harvested the florets and made an entire broccoli head, but it was not anything that would have been marketable inside the stores. So we go to the next one. So here we have the differences. Irrigation only was the amount that we put on the one line of plants that got irrigation water only. And then the orange and white, or orange and blue together was how much nitrogen they got for the grower standard trial with fertilizer. Mm-hmm. And so you can see that the 3 amounts that were put on through irrigation water should have been enough to get a sufficient crop out. But the nitrogen use efficiency, especially early on in the season when the crops don't have a lot of roots, you're putting a lot of water on to keep that bed wet, but you're not getting the utilization efficiency that you think you are. So the nitrogen goes right past the root zone in the early stages and can't be utilized by the roots. So at a certain point, you will have enough roots to get that irrigation water to be utilized efficiently, but the percentage is not what it is. It's not a 1-for-1 nitrate application.
And for A-R, this is just one planting of broccoli. So if you take into consideration they're planting maybe 3 times in 1 calendar year, then you can see how fast the A accumulates when you add up A irrigation and A together for 3 turns of broccoli.
Yeah. If you can move to the next one. So overall, our conclusion for this trial, so the heavy clay soil with no applied in had a 30% grower standard return. The medium loam soil had about a 10% yield of the grower standard, and there was absolutely no marketable yield in the growers or in the sandy soil. So our push would be to give it a credit depending on the organic nitrogen sources that are utilized, more credit for a pellet than a liquid. And then there needs to be more research done on the irrigation efficiency. We're seeing When we do the nitrogen reporting for all of the Preservation Inc. and Water Board reporting, we're seeing exceedances in those sandy soils. And so it does look like it is a textural effect on how efficient that nitrogen can be used from the irrigation water.
And as far as the NO3N in the wells, each ranch has decreased, some more than others, but over the years, over the course of the past 5 years, there has been a decrease as Chris has been trying to limit synthetic N applied, but at the same time, he's not able to use every single pound of irrigation N.
I think that was the last slide. Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much, Christopher and Danny Lou. Next up, we have Sarah Lopez from Preservation Inc. Sarah, if you'd like to turn on your camera when you have a chance.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Again, my name is Sarah Lopez. I'm with Central Coast Water Quality Preservation, Inc., and we are the coalition-like third-party group that helps Central Coast farmers comply with the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. My presentation today contains 3 unrelated or miscellaneous talking points related to panel charge questions and the panel's draft recommendations to date. And then the rest of my slides, talking points 4, 5, and 6, relate to similarities and differences between the Central Coast and Central Valley's approaches. Sort of in casual terms, it's kind of a comparison of the CB SWAT approach versus the A-R equation approach. Next slide, please. This was just my talking points. Next slide, please. Okay. Miscellaneous point number 1, I just would like to supplement the record for these proceedings regarding trends in Central Coast domestic well nitrate concentrations. The results on this slide are from a recent Central Coast Water Board trend analysis. And so if we just go around the pie chart in a clockwise direction, 4% of the wells in the analysis, so about 34 wells, had significant decreasing trends in nitrate. 8% or 74 of the wells had significant increasing trends in nitrate. Statisticians will tell us that we shouldn't use, if there's not statistical significance, we shouldn't use the word trend. So everything else is considered a pattern, not a quote unquote non-significant trend. So 44% of the wells had no trend, but the trend line or pattern was in a positive or increasing direction. That's 425 wells. 4% of the wells had a slope of 0. That's 37 wells. And then 392 wells had no statistically significant trend, but the overall pattern or slope of the trend line was in the negative or decreasing direction. Next slide, please. It looks like there's a missing animation here. Could you advance one more time? That's great. Thank you. Okay, so on this point, this largely relates to panel discussions that took place on December 12th about there being a potential carve out for small farms growing diverse crop mixes to try and reduce some of the reporting burden, exempting them from reporting R or nitrogen removed. And I think that will be very helpful to them, and I certainly wouldn't object to it. But I also think that if the goal is real relief of reporting burdens, I would just like to ask that folks consider the bigger picture of what these growers are faced with, and potentially look at softening requirements for crop specificity in the N applied and crop ET reporting requirements as well, because those are really just as burdensome as trying to derive crop specific yields. So the list on the slide here is all of the information that a Central Coast grower needs to report in a Central Coast INNP report. And above the line these are kind of the easy things. You just look it up, what's my ag waiver number, what's my ranch name, what's my assessor parcel number, how many acres were crop versus left fallow. So no calculations in that stuff, and it's once per ranch. Nobody's struggling with that. The parts below the line are the hard parts, and this is what growers are either having to schedule a help session with Preservation Inc. for, or they're having to pay for a consultant to help them or just do it for them. And these require calculations, complex unit conversions, and the allocation of numbers to specific crops. And on the Central Coast, this is highly, highly specific. So they can't report brassicas or leafy greens or root vegetables. It has to be carrot, lettuce, spinach, broccoli, kale, all that specificity. And so if they're reporting crop acres for each of those specific crops, they've got to break down their fertilizer, which is often purchased and applied at the ranch level. They've got to come up with an SWAG for the previous presentation for how much of that fertilizer went to each of those specific crops. And then trying to get evapotranspiration by crop is an even just greater challenge for them. And so really at the end of the day, what we're doing if we're just exempting them from reporting R, what we're doing in this giant list of things, including a lot of complex calculations, it's just that little yellow highlighted line that we're helping them with. And so I just wanted to ask that folks who are interested and invested in trying to right size that reporting burden, maybe take a look at the rest of this big picture of what they're being faced with. Next slide, please. Okay. This is kind of a riff on a talking point I had in a previous meeting, just orienting you to the graph here. We're looking at A-R in pounds of N per acre per year on the y-axis, and then various potential individual ranches or groundwater protection areas on the x-axis. And understanding that reports are coming in extremely high or extremely low, which represents calculation errors. We have an upper extent of valid reports. We have an 80th percentile. Currently on the Central Coast, the 80th percentile of all reports at the ranch level, Preservation Inc. right now is calculating that to be 500 pounds of N per acre, and that's with the ET adjustment on N and irrigation water. And then we jump down to the water quality protective level, which is currently coincident with the 10th percentile of Central Coast INMP reports. And just based on my understanding of things, I'm anticipating that Preservation Inc.'s members, particularly vegetable farms, are going to start encountering feasibility issues somewhere in that range, somewhere, below the 80th percentile, but well above the 10th percentile, somewhere on that kind of envisioned glide path to protecting water quality. Next slide, please. And that's important. If you could, one more click, please. One more, please. Sorry about that. Nope, go back. Sorry about that. Okay, it's important because what I find is that grower attitudes towards compliance kind of fall into three different buckets. There's the recalcitrant bucket where the grower is able to comply but unwilling. There's the category of they're able and willing to comply if they're properly informed and noticed of the need to do so, and maybe there are some consequences. And then there's the group that are willing to comply but unable for some reason. And one example of that would probably be the presentation you just heard from Chris Hyde. You've got growers trying to leverage the nitrogen in their irrigation water. And some are having some success. And I know Chris has been working very hard on this, but he's also showing examples of where it doesn't entirely work out, at least not at this point in time. And so we know there are growers in that willing but unable bucket. In my opinion, in my experience, really, there just are not enough recalcitrant farmers on the Central Coast to explain the level of nitrogen impairment that we have in the groundwater. This is not the loading problem that we are facing is not a recalcitrant grower problem. Next slide, please. And maybe 2 more clicks. Right. Okay. And so a good regulatory program, I'm hoping what will shake out of this, recalcitrant growers, the very few of them that there are, they really do need clear consequences. Those who are able and willing to comply, if properly informed, they need robust extension, best management practice information, clear communication about timelines and numeric targets and limits, and they will comply if they're able to do so. The concern with agronomic feasibility is that if a majority of our loading or a significant portion of our loading ties to this third category of growers who are willing but unable to comply, then this kind of draft idea I hear evolving out of the expert panel here about, well, let's start with limits in the 80th percentile, and then we'll have a step down or a glide path from high outliers to what's water quality protective. It's not cognizant of the growers in this category that have the agronomic feasibility issues. And so I'm just concerned that when we talk about limits help us with recalcitrant growers. They're a hard consequence for growers who need one, but they don't address agronomic feasibility. And so limits alone do not make a program. And so I think if limits are going to come out of this expert panel or a subsequent state water board process, we need to also talk about the rest of the program. What is happening between the 80th percentile and the water quality protective level to support growers with agronomic feasibility issues in bringing down their loading. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is really just a placeholder for I wanted to kind of let the community and remind the expert panel members know about a stakeholder advisory process that Preservation Inc. facilitated on the Central Coast in 2023 and 2024 towards the development of an alternative compliance pathway for irrigation and nutrient management compliance. And we covered a lot of the same ground that the charge questions to the expert panel are covering. And some of our technical panel members in that process were Hannah Waterhouse, Michael Kahn, and Richard Smith. We also had environmental and EJ stakeholders and a number of growers in our stakeholder advisory group. And so we really explored towards developing this alternative compliance pathway, which has not yet been fully fleshed out or approved. We really explored similarities and differences between the CV SWAT and the current A-R approach on the Central Coast. And so I'm probably not going to have time to go into everything in detail, but I wanted to share some of those comparisons with folks in hopes of having a better understanding. So next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is a visualization of the Ag Order 4.0 compliance pathway number 1, where all of the A terms are visualized as arrows going into the root zone, and all of the R terms are visualized as arrows coming out of the root zone. We also have the subsurface divided into a 3-layer cake, a root zone, a vadose zone, and an aquifer. And in the Central Coast, the outcome of the A-R equation is referred to as the discharge value. And it is the net of all A terms minus all R terms. And then you can also see those smaller dark green arrows showing the reduction of the A values. These are the credits for organic nitrogen and compost and organic fertilizers in the current approach of Compliance Pathway 1 in Ag Order 4.0. Next slide, please. I won't go into all the math here, but this is how the Central Coast Ag Order kind of deals with vadose zone processes. Essentially, there's a credit for 4 pounds of vadose zone denitrification and a recharge dilution factor of 1.6 acre-feet per acre per year. And that gets us from 27 pounds that Dr. Harder talks about as being protective of water quality up to 50 pounds of kind of a root zone discharge allowance. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we look at that against a slightly different graphic with the root zone at the top, the vadose zone in the middle, and the groundwater at the bottom, the A-R formula, apologize, I'm gonna have some awkward animation on this slide as well. If you could hit maybe, there we go. So the A-R formula addresses the root zone. The 1.6 acre feet recharge allocation addresses some hydrologic conditions. That 4 pound allocation addresses post-root zone denitrification, and aquifer conditions are not considered, meaning the final limit on the Central Coast that in 4.0 does not depend on aquifer conditions. Then over on the left side, we have the Central Valley approach. If you could hit the advanced button one time, please. Okay. So in the Central Valley, you have CV SWAT dealing with the root zone. You have NP SAT model describing the vadose zone or post-root zone processes. And you have two hydrogeologic models, CVHM and C2VSIM, describing aquifer conditions. And then CV SWAT and the two hydrogeologic models both inform NPSAT. So both regions are at least giving a nod to these different elements of the system. It's just on the Central Valley side, it's kind of models all the way. On the Central Coast side, it's kind of an equation and some simplifying assumptions. Next slide, please. Okay, another key difference between Central Valley and the Central Coast is that in the Central Valley, the assessment of water quality impact is completed on a township basis, which includes a summation of ranch recharge or discharge from the root zone and other regional recharge. On the Central Coast, we're not really considering other regional recharge, and the assessment of water quality impact happens on an individual ranch basis. Next slide. Real quick, I won't get into the details here, but I just wanted to mention that one thing that NPSAT does is it considers kind of capture zones and source areas for individual hypothetical wells or points in the aquifer. And this was a visualization that we actually did with the support of Ludorf and Skelmanini for a Central Coast basin. And I just want to point out that the capture zones or zones of influence for any given point in the aquifer, especially over long time periods, span multiple ranches. So those little green and pink polygons there are different ranches, and you can clearly see all of those capture zones kind of aggregating discharge from multiple ranches. And so that's one of the reasons why in the Central Valley, as I understand it, they're using groundwater protection areas that are bigger than a single ranch. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Erin. Can we do just a quick time check?
Yes, I've got 3 more slides and I will gloss over 1.5 of them. Does that work?
Okay. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize. So this is, so I won't spend too much time, but I would like to have this available to the expert panel members if they're curious about what exactly SWAT does, and then what the A-R equation does and doesn't consider. So on the left, this table looks at all the inputs, parameters, and kind of things that the SWAT model looks at, and then which of those things does the A-R equation look at, and then our stakeholder advisory groups explored the possibility of an A-R plus equation and an A-R plus equation that also included basically its own root zone library of soil and climate conditions. And big take-home point here is that there's just a lot of things that are in orange on the SWAT side that SWAT is considering, and those are based on scientific literature and expert judgment, and those things are not considered in the Central Coast system. And then with these kind of expanded A-R equation and maybe considering soil and climate, we get to potentially slightly more refined and nuanced understanding of root zone discharge. Okay, next slide, please. I'll just be real quick here that this is what we presented to the Central Coast Water Board in our first iteration of an alternative compliance pathway work plan. And this is basically the A-R equation with all possible terms. The A-R equation is already fairly comprehensive, so there's just placeholders here for a few additional terms. And the last thing I'll point out is just to the right of the root zone label there. There are input and output arrows for nitrogen transformations, and that's a placeholder for the Central Coast to at some point in time use a root zone nitrogen model that would give us mineralization and demineralization terms in lieu of or in addition to the current approach, which is just to apply some credits for nitrogen in organic fertilizers and amendments. And so I'll leave it there. If you go to the next slide, I won't talk about it. This is just the list of all those terms. What are their definitions, and what do we envision would be the data source for the actual quantities applied to those terms? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Sarah. Much appreciated. Next, we're joined by a panel of folks representing a variety of environmental justice and conservation organizations. I'm going to start with, I believe, Nat Kane. Are you starting off the presentation for your group?
I am not starting. I think is Corinne or Elias starting? Or Kaya?
We're in. Wonderful. One moment. Corinne, if you could.
Yes. Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corinne Gibson. I am a staff attorney with Leadership Council, and I am joined here today by, as the State Water Board mentioned, several other folks and colleagues. So if we could move to the next slide, please. Just lays out our agenda and who we have with us today. So we have Kaya Rivers, who's a senior policy advocate with Community Water Center, Elias Rodriguez, staff attorney, the Unincorporated Community Justice Program with CRLA. We have Rosa Carrillo Orozco of San Gerardo Cooperative, Nat Kane, executive director of the Environmental Law Foundation, Dr. Iris Stewart Fry of Santa Clara University, and Dr. Jake D'Alessandro, also of Santa Clara University and remote sensing scientist. And then next slide, please. So similarly to Sarah Lopez, we are also going to cover a variety of topics. So first, I will be talking about final limits. We'll move into community impacts, then interim limits, data needs, metrics to calculate discharge, and action that is needed now. Next slide, please. So as you are familiar, charge question 1 asks if there is enough data and scientific research to set crop-specific nitrogen-related limits that are protective of groundwater quality and support a long-term and sustainable irrigated lands regulatory program. And we urge the expert panel to answer this question in the affirmative and say yes, sufficient data and scientific research do exist to establish nitrogen-related limits targeting the highest dischargers first and allowing lower priority regions to come into compliance over time. Next slide, please. So in my portion of the presentation, I'm going to discuss a bit of context and background of the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, framing of past conversations within this expert panel process around a false dichotomy and costs of noncompliance, and finally, the need for final limits. Next slide, please. So to provide a bit of context, California was one of the first states in the nation to codify environmental justice in statute and adopt policies to address the unfair burden of pollution from the most vulnerable to its effects. In 2012, California also became the first state in the nation to legislatively recognize the human right to water. Consistent with state legislation, in February 2016, the State Water Board adopted Resolution number 2016-00101, which identifies the human right to water as a core value and directs its implementation in State Water Board programs and activities. The Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program is a first-in-the-nation effort toward enshrining environmental justice principles and the human right to water, and the expert panel has heard and considered input from the agricultural community. The state of groundwater contamination in the Central Coast and Central Valley regions in California is such that enforceable limits are necessary to meet California's legal requirements for groundwater quality. The next step for the ILRP is to move towards enforceable regulatory programs that lead to achievement of water quality objectives on a fixed time schedule and in conformance with the law. One of the goals of the ILRP is to ensure that irrigated agricultural discharges do not impair access by Central Valley communities and residents to safe and reliable drinking water. And one objective to accomplish this goal is to encourage implementation of management practices that improve water quality without jeopardizing the economic viability for all sizes of irrigated agricultural operations or placing an undue burden on rural communities to provide safe drinking water themselves. Included in such a burden is that costs associated with nitrate contamination to groundwater are not equitably distributed. A 2011 study found that community water systems serving majority Latino or renter households had higher nitrate levels. Next slide, please. And we recognize the tension between protecting groundwater quality and further ensuring that the ILRP is sustainable for growers and the state. We further understand that achieving drinking water limitations with how the agricultural industry works right now may not be possible, and that's why we're asking for change. A combination of interim and final limits, progressive enforcement, and discount factors can point the future of agriculture in a more sustainable direction, and sustainability does not necessarily indicate a lack of profitability. Assertions that meeting a final limit that is protective of water quality will be catastrophic for growers rests on this false dichotomy that we either have safe and accessible drinking water or jobs, or we either have safe and accessible drinking water or we can grow food. But underlying this assumption is that because things are this way now, they should stay this way forever, no matter how that harms communities. Such assertions have also been proven false by many growers who have been able to stay below suggested limits, according to reported data. In 2019, 13% of ranches on the Central Coast were achieving the 50-pound per acre discharge target, and 2024 INMP Central Coast summary reports show over 9,000 ranch acres meeting the final 50-pound targets. Currently, the status quo puts the burden on communities and their advocates to prove that change is possible, when instead the burden should be on the agricultural community to prove that change is impossible. Ag Order 4.0 proposed to set targets for the first 4 years and then set progressively lower limits over the next 25 years. Growers had 2 to 10 years to meet these limits. Recommending anything less than progressively lower limits will ensure that the ILRP will remain business as usual. And lastly, this false binary also fails to account for costs of noncompliance, including health effects on residents, stress, fear, and decreases in quality of life stemming from a lack of safe drinking water, the strain on public health systems, costs to public water systems, and leaves wide areas of the state unsuitable for new housing development. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I'm highlighting health effects other than methemoglobinemia or blue baby syndrome, which was the reason for establishing the 10 milligram per liter nitrate MCL. I will note, however, that a 2024 Stanford study found the reported cases of blue baby syndrome to cluster in population centers and agricultural areas, including several zip codes in the Central Valley. So in addition to blue baby syndrome, cancer risk, including colorectal cancer, bladder cancer, ovarian cancer, are statistically significantly increased. Thyroid disease, birth complications, including spina bifida, limb deficiency, cleft palate, and cleft lip. And lastly, cost to individuals. A 2011 study found that households in the Central Valley spend an average of 4.1% of household income on drinking water, primarily due to reliance on bottled water and home treatment. This is more than double the EPA recommended 1.5% affordability benchmark and reflects broader environmental injustices. I will also note that reverse osmosis, one of the primary point of use or home treatment methods for nitrate filtration, is less effective once nitrate contamination exceeds a certain level, usually 25 to 30 milligrams per liter. Next slide, please. Health conditions associated with nitrate contamination are costly to treat, and when these costs disproportionately fall on lower income and disadvantaged communities who may use state-funded healthcare programs, that cost is borne by the state. A study on the costs of colorectal cancer cases, which is the fourth most prevalent type of cancer in the US, and adverse pregnancy outcomes attributable to nitrate contamination in the United States found that cancer-related medical costs alone can be estimated between 250 million to 1.5 billion US dollars per year. These costs increased when indirect costs from productivity losses were considered, estimated in this study to be between 1.3 to 6.5 billion dollars annually. In a more limited study just focusing on the state of Wisconsin, which has 1/6 the population of California and is less than half its size geographically, similarly estimated nitrate attributable costs of adverse health outcomes range from 23 to 80 million dollars annually just for the state. Next slide, please. And also in the United States, the annual costs associated with agricultural nitrate pollution surpassed $157 billion in 2016, encompassing expenses related to healthcare, water treatment, and foregone recreational opportunities. For water treatment, these costs are then passed on to ratepayers. In California, the cost to construct a nitrate removal system for a single mental health facility in Porterville, where well nitrate levels were 16 milligrams per liter, was approximately $3 million, and a GEI feasibility study for East Porterville at the height of the drought in 2016 estimated tank and bottled water programs cost $633,500 per month just for East Porterville alone, which has an estimated population of over 7,331 residents. Next slide, please. Okay. A final standard for nitrogen discharge is a technical question, not a policy question. It is the amount of nitrogen discharged from an acre of irrigated land that for given local precipitation and hydrogeological conditions will not cause or contribute to a violation of the 10 milligram per liter nitrate NCL. The regional boards have a legal duty to adopt plans that will eventually reach this condition, but they have discretion to set timelines that can push compliance into the future under Water Code 13263C. Focusing efforts on the regions and discharges that are severely impacted by nitrate contamination will naturally provide additional time for less nitrate impacted regions to collect data and implement monitoring programs to ultimately reach final nitrogen discharge limits. A framework of interim and final limits can be implemented according to time schedules, allowing growers to adjust their irrigation and fertilization practices to achieve compliance over time. Regardless of the panel's recommendation on a final standard, no amount of uncertainty should justify failing to move quickly and decisively to address current excessive nitrogen discharge by setting interim limits. Importantly, growers do not need to meet every single limit immediately, but they must make a concerted effort to lower nitrate application and discharge over time. However, if setting interim immediate percentile limits, the limit should be set at minimum at the 75th percentile and scaled down over time. And acreage data is necessary for this, which will be covered later in this presentation. The approach recommended by the expert panel should not be weaker than the outlier provisions in the Central Valley. If the expert panel does recommend a percentile-based approach to interim limits, it should ideally be stronger than the Central Valley's approach. Additional education and outreach is undoubtedly a critical component of the expert panel's recommendations, but it alone has not led to a demonstrable improvement in nitrogen discharge or groundwater quality. We need interim and final limits, not only so every Californian has access to safe and accessible drinking water, but to be in compliance with the law, and we have the data necessary to set them in the most impacted regions. Thank you, and I will now pass it over to Rosa Correa Orozco to talk about community impacts.
Hi, thank you, Corinne. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. My name is Rosa Carrillo. I'm from the community of San Gerardo here in Salinas. Today I'm representing my communities of color. Last week I was invited to be a part of the Safer advisory group here in Salinas. So I went And to be honest, it was really sad to go and hear when we went to the community on Royal Oaks to hear the problems that the communities are facing. It's not just San Gerardo that is facing again the contamination of the well, but it's also another communities. But to see the faces of the people there, almost crying and asking for help because their water is double, triple, or 4 times the levels of the contaminations is heartbreaking. And for people to say that we don't understand, that we are asking for something that it's impossible, or that we are asking for business, or that we are going to take the agriculture to bankrupt, that we are asking for so much. We are not. We are asking to do something good for our communities because it's a right. It's a human right. We are humans. We are not just something like despicable. We are humans, and we are asking to look into our eyes, to walk with us, to come to our communities, and to see the way that we are living in fear that tomorrow we are not going to have a clean water for our kids. To see our kids having so much health problems, to see our elderlies coming with so much health problems. I have to see my fellow friends going to chemotherapy. Yesterday, I had to go and pick up one of my members from the hospital because he is going through the chemotherapy. And as a manager here in the community, I have to do it, because not just because I have to do it, but because I'm a human, and it's my duty to do it. Like, extend my hand, extend my heart to them. So it's the reason why I'm asking to set a limits for our communities, because we are right now, it's so many years that the groups is asking to set limits, because not just San Gerardo, it's already to so much. I'm sorry, I'm getting so emotional because the way the things are going right now is heartbreaking to see so many communities losing the water, losing the clean water that they think that they have, and at the end it's all contaminated that they're drinking. It's like you are giving them venom to drink. So that's not right. To the thing that some people are doing it just because they want just to save some money. So it's more than 14,000 residents in the Central Coast that are living with this nitrates contamination. Majority of this, it's a community of color, rural communities. So it's the reason why we are asking to set limits. And like Corinne was saying, it's not like that we are asking, set it and they have to comply tomorrow. No, we know that it's taking time, but it's already so many years that we are being asking for this change. So coming back, San Gerardo already lost three wells due to contamination of the nitrates, and our fourth well it's already at 8.5. So what's going to happen in three more years? We are going to lose again if limits are not set. So what's going to happen to the families on this community? What's going to happen to the families on Las Lomas, on Royal Oaks, on Greenfield, and San Lucas? So it's the reason why I'm asking to the expert panel to recommend these limits to the water board to see and set the limits, and also the agriculture industry to see and touch their heart, and to see the community as like we are humans, and we are asking to see us like that, and we have the right to have a clean water for our communities and for our future generations here in our in this place. And like the California Constitution says, the waters belong to all Californians. So we are here, so the water belongs to us. And thank you, and I'll pass it to Elias.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rosa, for that inspiring message. Good afternoon. My name is Elias Rodriguez with California Rural Legal Assistance. And I want to build on Ms. Gibson and Ms. Carrillo's presentation and share. You could advance to the next slide, please. I would like to share how the panel can advance racial and environmental justice by recommending fertilizer application and discharge limits. And first, I'll briefly cover the data demonstrating disproportionate impacts that agriculture has on Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as low-income communities. Next, I'll highlight key laws that require the state of California, including the State Water Board, to advance racial and environmental justice. And finally, I will posit the ways in which the panel's recommendations on limits could have racial and environmental justice impacts. And I ask the panelists to recommend fertilizer application and discharge limits as a way to advance the state's commitments to racial and environmental justice. Before we begin, it's important to acknowledge the historic relationship between race, environmental justice, and agriculture. At the inception of this nation, white landowners forcefully transported and enslaved African people, forcing them to cultivate and harvest tobacco, cotton, and other specialty crops. Early European migrants also used intensive agriculture to forcefully assimilate indigenous peoples of the Americas. Today, the industry continues to have a tense relationship with race and environmental justice, where folks of color dominate the industry's workforce. These relationships require us to pause, to reflect, and to reconcile the ongoing harms that may continue as a result of historic wrongs. Next slide, please. As I mentioned previously, folks of color dominate the agricultural industry's workforce. Naturally, the same people of color who dominate the industry's workforce live near the fields in which they work. Other folks of color and low-income communities also live near agricultural operations because that is where their families have taken root after being priced out of of more urban areas. As a result, communities of color and low-income communities feel the heaviest negative impacts of industrial agriculture, including disproportionate exposure to nitrate contamination, what the panel is convened for this year. For example, research conducted by Drs. Iris Stewart-Fry and Jake D'Alessandro shows that in the Central Coast, census tracts with predominantly Latinx folks are 4.36 times more likely to have groundwater that exceeds the 10 milligrams per liter MCL, or maximum contaminant level, for nitrate than predominantly white census tracts. In other words, Latinx folks are much more likely to live near and be impacted by poor water quality. Additionally, the analysis found that in census tracts with high percentages of people who report speaking English as a second language, on average, groundwater nitrate levels are 3.6 milligrams per liter higher than in wells in census tracts with lower percentages of speakers who learn English as a second language. When evaluating for financial poverty levels, the analysis found that wells in census tract with higher levels of financial poverty have groundwater nitrate levels that are 3 milligrams per liter higher than in census tracts with lower levels of financial poverty. The table you see on the left shows similar findings, that the characteristic of the census tract typically determines the percentage of wells testing above 10 milligrams per liter for nitrate. And then the map on the right shows a visual overlay of poverty level in census tracts and nitrate concentration results from well data. The census tracts with higher poverty are darker gray and black, and include communities like King City, Greenfield, and Santa Maria. And these communities have more wells with higher levels of nitrate that often exceed the maximum contaminant level. In contrast, in the census tracts that are a lighter gray color, where communities with lower financial poverty levels live, these are communities in the Central Coast like Carmel Valley, Santa Cruz, and Paso Robles. There's a lower concentration of wells exceeding the maximum contaminant level for nitrates. Next slide, please. Nitrate contamination also disproportionately impacts low-income communities of color in the San Joaquin Valley. This map, also created and published by Drs. D'Alessandro and Stuart Fry, overlays well data with demographic data in the Turlock and Modesto Priority 1 groundwater basins. Disadvantaged communities in this map are measured by federal poverty level and are indicated in grid lines. Their analysis finds that while 41% of shallow wells in the basins exceed the nitrate MCLs, in disadvantaged communities that are also unincorporated, 95% of the areas in those communities have wells that exceed nitrate MCLs. Next slide, please. The State Water Board and California legislature acknowledged these disproportionate impacts. In fact, in legislative findings for a law that the California legislature recently enacted, the legislator found that race is the strongest predictor of access to clean and safe water. The State Water Board has since committed to advancing racial and environmental justice through its Racial Equity Action Plan. And in 2023, the State Water Board also committed to taking action to address nitrate pollution based on this panel's recommendations. The State Water Board will use your recommendations to outline how the state regulates agricultural operators and their fertilizer discharges. As you heard earlier from our colleague, Ms. Gibson, California is unique in that our state enshrined into state law the human right to water. Everyone, including this panel, your recommendations, and agricultural operators have a role to play in ensuring that all communities can exercise their human right to water. Next slide. That is why the work of this expert panel is so critical. Disproportionate levels of nitrate contamination means that communities disproportionately impacted pay higher water rates. They have more significant health impacts. And since we know that disproportionate impacts exist, we know that policies that address the nitrate drinking water crisis will affect the lives of environmental justice communities. Limits on fertilizer use, for example, will reduce nitrogen loading, and it'll reduce the pollution that impacts environmental justice communities. In sum, limits on the application and discharge of nitrogen can advance the efforts that the legislator and the State Water Board committed to achieve racial and environmental justice. The panel's recommendations can correct historic wrongs that persist and can reconcile inequitable access to clean water. Enforceable limits will allow us to move closer to a California where race nor poverty determines someone's access to clean water. Progressively stricter enforceable limits will allow not only environmental justice communities, but they will allow all communities in our future generations to have clean water. Thank you. And now I'll pass it on to our colleague, Mr. Kane, to discuss our coalition's framework with respect to other charged questions.
Thanks, Elias. Thanks, Rosa. Thanks, Corinne. I also want to thank the members of the expert panel that are here today and the members of the state board and board staff, regional board staff that are here today. I know this has been a lot of meetings over this process, and I really appreciate everyone's time being here to listen to what we have to say. Next slide, please. I am going to talk about questions 2 and questions 5. And my name, by the way, is Nat Kane. I'm the Executive Director of Environmental Law Foundation. So I know that's a little out of order, but I think thematically these fit together. I'll start with question 2. And question 2 asks whether there is sufficient data to set increasingly protective interim nitrogen-related limits. And we think the answer is a very clear yes here. We think that sufficient data and scientific research exists. We think that a limit should start by targeting the highest dischargers first and step down over time as we make progress towards achieving water quality objectives. And we also think that a time schedule with milestones leading to compliance is actually required by law. And I think that's what the bottom of that slide says. I got a little cut off. Required by law. Next slide, please. So let's talk about those legal requirements. Non-point source policy, key element 3. This is a binding policy. The boards have to comply with this, and it requires a specific time schedule that will achieve water quality objectives, that has quantifiable milestones, that is no longer than reasonably necessary. And we think that that fits very well into this concept of interim limits that was asked by question 2. This requirement in the non-point source policy, key element 3, was upheld in the Monterey Coastkeeper case in 2018 by the Court of Appeal, which actually threw out an earlier iteration of the Central Coast program that did not have a specified time schedule with quantifiable milestones. So this is something that the courts take seriously, and it's something that the state and regional boards are going to be looking to as they move forward with this program. Also, separately, the anti-degradation policy has a requirement that waste discharge requirements impose best practicable treatment and control. And so that idea of what is best and what is practicable given current technology is something that the state and regional boards are going to have to consider as they move forward with these programs. And we think that interim limits fit very neatly into this concept of what is best and what is practicable as far as nitrate control technology and nitrate control practices moving forward. Next slide. So we think that numeric limits, not just limits, but numeric limits are important for these interim limits. We have seen over the previous decades of these programs that program requirements based on management practices, based on education, based on reporting, are not moving the needle on nitrogen discharge. They're just not. We need to have a numeric standard that tells growers what they need to do, and it's transparent and clear as to what is required and what is going to happen over time. Quick note on geographic limits. We think that what's going to work best is an individual limit for individual growers, as opposed to a township level or geographic scale compliance. The geographic township level can be useful for seeing how a program is for measuring a program over the landscape, but it doesn't tell an individual grower what they need to do and when they need to do it. And I think that that's what we need in order to change behavior, because it's the individual growers that are making the decisions. And it's the individual growers that need to know what the rules are when they're making the decisions every year. Next slide. So some features of interim limits that we think are necessary. We need to start by eliminating the highest discharges and then stepping down. We need to be making incremental progress all the time towards compliance. We need to have programs that gather useful data and make it publicly available so that members of the public can see that this program is working and so that we can study the program to see if we can make it better. Like I said, we need individual compliance. And then we need to incentivize proven management practices, cover crops, high carbon soil amendments, practices that we've talked about a lot in this panel. There needs to be explicit incentivization for those practices as appropriate to keep us moving in the right direction. And especially to make sure that we're not disincentivizing those practices. One quick word on the availability of data. I know that the concept of anonymity has been discussed a lot in this program. I just want to point out that anonymity is not required by any statute or any regulation for these programs. The state board's ESJ order from 2018 allowed limited anonymity for certain data on a temporary basis, but it also found that the data that was anonymized is not a trade secret and there is not a privacy interest in that data. And that same ESJ order also found, and the Court of Appeal on review also confirmed that the state and regional boards can obtain that data that is currently anonymous at any time if it determines that data is useful. Backing that up, a court in Monterey County almost about 8 years ago found that the total nitrogen applied data collected in the Central Coast is not trade secret and may be made available to the public. So I want to be very clear that current programs have some level of anonymity, but it is not required. And if this board finds that anonymity is not useful, and that if certain data, such as acreage data, is necessary to move the program forward, this panel is not required to find that anonymity is required in any of these programs moving forward. Next step, I want to talk about our actual ask for what we would like to see with the next steps of this program. And that would be that we look at A over R levels in 2025, or the most recent year where we have good data, and ask for an interim limit of 2025 mean A minus R, and get there within 5 years for each reasonable geographic area. We think, and we want incentives for proven management practices, as we discussed above, and we want it backed by fair, firm, equitable, progressive enforcement. We think that these mean levels are a reasonable, achievable level of discharge to shoot for in the short term. The fact that the average grower is achieving these levels already shows that you can fertilize at these levels and be profitable and grow crops. We also think that shooting for 2025 mean levels is going to eliminate those highest discharges and begin to move us towards improvements in water quality. So that's what we're asking for. Next slide, please. A few words on the difference between limits and targets, which are topics that have been discussed a lot in this panel. I think it's really important to recognize that limits are a backstop. Limits prevent a situation where some growers respond to incentives, begin to improve their practices, and potentially incur some costs on that basis, but others don't. Limits and enforceability prevent an economic advantage from being realized by growers who don't change their behaviors, while that growers who do change their behaviors potentially incur an economic disadvantage. We know that growers respond to incentives. We've seen that happen in the Central Coast. We saw the dramatic increase in cover cropping during the period before the state board remanded Ag Order 4.0 in 2023. We know that growers are capable of changing behavior. And we think that an enforceable limit with enforceability as a backstop is an important feature of this program to ensure that these changes actually happen. We absolutely recommend and believe in starting with education as a first step, but we don't believe that ending with education is an adequate last step. Next slide, please. A few more words on enforcement. Just start with a reminder that the water code, the legislature has said that discharging pollutants into waters of the state is not a vested right. It is a privilege. And the law on enforcement is clear that making a limit enforceable does not require draconian, immediate, crippling fines. This is quotes from the state board's own enforcement policy, which provides the procedure for and says how the state board is going to deal with enforcement. And it says that it's an escalating series of actions, but it begins with notification, with information and compliance assistance. And only if that doesn't work do we move towards an escalating series of actions. But at the same time, it recognizes this fairness issue, that it is not fair to not enforce against growers who are not complying and not changing their behavior while others are. And it recognizes that justice for communities at some point requires enforcement against growers who are causing a clear and present danger to drinking water, which we know is an issue. Next slide. Final points. I want to talk just briefly about charge question 6, which talks about application limits. These are levels. There are levels of nitrogen application that we know that are above fertilizer recommendations for any crop, and that they represent a real risk to groundwater. Next slide. These application limits are the simplest and easiest to calculate. They don't require complicated modeling. They don't require complicated, they don't even require reporting R. And for lots of the state, R has not been reported. It is not being reported. And some of that R data, may have reliability issues. And an application limit set just at the high levels to control these extreme discharges is an appropriate tool as a backstop to other requirements to prevent those extremely high discharges. So we think that the panel should continue to consider application limits as an option. That's all I have, and I'm going to turn it over to Iris to talk about data. Thank you.
Yes. Hi. Could we actually turn it over to my colleague Jake D'Alessandro first? And if you could leave me unmuted, we're going to be sharing the next section.
All right. Thank you, everybody. My name is Jake D'Alessandro. I work with Iris at Santa Clara University, as well as with CRLA and Elias Rodriguez. And we want to follow up with question 5 of evaluating applied and removed nitrate. And the question was, are the tables inside the summary reports for the irrigation and nitrate management plan an effective tool for evaluating applied and removed data? And we have seen then can demonstrate with the data that the tables really lack a lot of really important tools that can be used to make them as effective as possible. And this includes specific acreage data at the field scale, something that the Central Coast Region 3 provides. And it also lacks location and soil type data. The literature and the research shows that the specific soil that your crops are being grown on does have an influence on whether or not the nitrogen is percolating down and contaminating the groundwater at certain degrees. We have 2 tables screenshotted here, and the first one is aggregated at the township and range level. And it demonstrates why acreage data is important. This is not just one field of cherries. It's not just one orchard. This is the Public Land Survey System 6x6 mile data sets. And it has every year here from 2019 to 2023 for cherries. And you can see here in 2022 that there's a severe drop-off of acreage data that comes back up in 2023, indicating that this acreage information is not consistent in how it's being reported. So without this specific location, acreage, and soil type data, it really prevents the evaluation process for grower performance and potential regulatory approaches. Another really important thing that it prevents is how we can't verify it with grower coalition calculations and the CV-SWAT model approach. And this has been extensively documented actually in our request letter for acreage data that our entire coalition sent off. We have another example if you look at the bottom table, and it actually shows a different township and range system for almonds. And then it also has a 2018 value for 633 acres of wine grapes. In the reporting, these wine grapes, which is a very substantial area, 633 acres, is no longer reported after 2018. So, one field of grapes maybe not being decommissioned is reasonable, but for that to drop off completely is concerning and is indicative, in our opinion, of misreporting. 2 weeks ago, the current draft response, which was dated December 2nd, said that in the Central Valley, the agricultural water quality coalitions have taken on the role of enforcement with regard to their members. And this is inaccurate. The coalitions do not have the enforcement authority for this. The State Water Board does. Next slide, please. And just to follow up with more year-to-year variability in these A-R estimates, looking at all the Region 5 available data through the East San Joaquin order, between 2018 and 2023, the variation was quite substantial. There's 7 million total irrigated acres in the Central Valley, and we have our sources for that here, which is one, the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program and the California Water Library. And less than half is being reported even in the best years. And in 2018, only 21.1% of acres were being reported for applied and removed data on irrigated lands. And then in 2023, it had only rose to 35.7%. Additionally, from a peak in 2021, there has been actually a 17% decrease in irrigated acreage that's being reported. So there's still a substantial amount of irrigated lands that aren't reporting their A-R values. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Iris Stewart-Fry.
Thanks, Jake. Hello, everyone. My name is Iris Stewart-Fry. I'm a professor of water resources at Santa Clara University. I'd also like to thank everyone for their time today. Next slide, please. Continuing with question 5, this slide addresses the question of whether the current INMP data format is effective. And the short answer to this question is no. As we have argued, the effectiveness is compromised, especially through the lack of acreage, location, and soils data. Removal of acreage data limits the ability to evaluate nitrogen impacts on the scales that are important for nitrate contamination. And they also prevent the prioritization of targeted follow-up actions. Importantly, there is no evidence that requiring acreage data reduces data quality. On the Central Coast, where acreage data is reported and growers are not anonymous, data quality is at least as good, and in many cases higher, than in the Central Valley, where acreage data is withheld. The improved quality is likely due to greater staff involvement and oversight. Experience from other regulatory programs, such as the Federal Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act, show that self-reported data can be reliable. Despite self-reporting, those programs have driven major improvements in water and air quality over the last 50 years for the benefit of communities and the common good. Finally, there is no evidence that public INMP data on the Central Coast has been used to target individual growers. And as has been explained by my colleague Nat Kane, the 2018 Environmental Justice Order makes it clear that grower data is not a trade secret and carries no privacy interests. Next slide, please. What we want to highlight is what improvements should be made in this context. INMPs already collect a substantial amount of information, including applied and removed nitrogen, management practices, crop type, soil type, acreage, and location. In other words, the core data to evaluate nitrate management and groundwater impacts already exists. The challenge is not necessarily in what is collected, but how that data is reported, verified, reviewed, and made publicly available. To ensure accurate reporting, external quality checks are essential. This includes practices such as fertilizer purchase receipts, cross-checks with yield data, and especially also random audits. Existing regulations already recognize this need. Order WQ 2018-0002 directs regional boards to periodically audit third-party INMP records by spot checking that field-level yield data is being accurately transcribed and correctly converted. However, the frequency and consistency of these audits is currently inadequate to ensure confidence in this data. So there are several concrete improvements that could strengthen the data reliability. First, independent verification and auditing should be required on a regular basis. Second, audit frequency should be increased and standardized. Third, permit fees could be adjusted to ensure regional boards have adequate resources and staffing to perform these checks. Fourth, the State Water Resources Control Board could hire staff dedicated specifically to evaluating INMP data quality and recommending program refinements. Finally, increased education and appropriate protections or exemptions for small farmers can improve reporting accuracy while avoiding unnecessary burdens, helping to ensure the program is both effective and equitable. And with this, I would like to turn over to, I believe, Kaya Rivers.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Next slide, please. My name is Kaya Rivers, and I'm a senior policy advocate at Community Water Center. Thank you for your time today. I'm going to be covering charge questions 3 and 4, but it's a little bit out of order, so I'm going to be covering number 4 first. Next slide, please. So charge question number 4 asks, is A-R a scientifically appropriate metric to evaluate and quantify nitrogen discharges to groundwater, either on its own or used in conjunction with A/R? And are there any other methods or metrics that could help quantify nitrogen discharges? And yes, A-R is a scientifically valid model to evaluate and quantify nitrogen discharges to groundwater. And it can also provide transparency and accessibility to nitrogen discharge accounting. Next slide, please. So right now, there are 2 current models used in the state to quantify nitrogen discharges. One of the models is the A-R model used in the Central Coast, where discharge values are computed by inputting irrigation and nutrient management plan data and additional factors into the A-R equation. And there are a few different variations of this equation, as you can see on the right. This is found in Ag Order 4.0. And then in the Central Valley, irrigation and nutrient plan data is inputted into the SWAT model, as well as additional factors, which include soil, climate, and hydrogeology factors. Next slide, please. An A-R is a scientifically valid model that is sufficient for regulatory purposes when coupled with robust reporting, accounting, and transparency measures, as my colleagues addressed earlier. And it could also provide a couple of benefits such as transparency and accessibility, especially to stakeholders. And it could also provide consistency between regions in California. Next slide, please. So when comparing the A-R model to CV-SWAT is much more complex and opaque, and overall makes it a more difficult model for stakeholders to comprehend and understand, and in turn, more difficult for impacted communities to understand how their groundwater is being protected and regulated, and how discharges may be impacting their drinking water. On the other hand, the A-R equation can be easily understood by stakeholders, as stakeholders can input values into the A-R equation to calculate discharges independently of a model, ultimately allowing stakeholders to better understand discharges in their area that may be impacting their drinking water in their community. Next slide, please. And with adequate INMP data, A-R is a valid discharge evaluation and quantification model that can be universally applied to each region, and therefore meaning that discharges can be easily understood by all stakeholders in each region, which is critical for accountability and stakeholder participation in the nitrate regulatory processes. Furthermore, we've heard from Preservation Inc., the third-party group on the Central Coast, that there are concerns that the SWOT model cannot be easily applied to the Central Coast. And while the A-R model used on the Central Coast can easily be applied to the Central Valley. Lastly, EJ organizations have also raised concerns about the proposed groundwater protection targets that were developed using the SWOT model as they propose minimal loading reductions to groundwater. Because of these concerns, these groundwater protection targets are under a peer review or about to undergo a peer review. And I urge the panel to avoid endorsing a model when its application to develop the groundwater protection targets is being reviewed. Next slide, please. So question number 3 asks, are there any scientific or technical considerations or advances related to the factors discussed in the first Agricultural Expert Panel's 2014 report that the State Water Board should take into account into future policy decisions regarding implementation issues or direct enforceability of the nitrogen-related limits described above? And since 2014, groundwater quality has declined significantly in the Central Valley and on the Central Coast. And at the same time, there is no clear trend of decreasing nitrogen use or discharge in these areas. And the need for aggressive action has only grown more acute. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, groundwater quality has declined significantly over the past decade. In 2021, Region 3 documented